Hi, this is Ed Driscoll. Welcome to Silicon Graffiti. I'm talking today with Michael Malone, who writes for both ABC News and PajamsMedia.com as a contributor to the Edgelings blog. He's also the author of a new book, The Future Arrived Yesterday, which is a follow-up to the book he co-authored in 1992 called The Virtual Corporation. And Michael, thanks for stopping by Silicon Graffiti.
Oh, it's good to be here.
Michael, the new book is subtitled The Rise of the Protean Corporation. What is a Protean Corporation? And to tie it in with your earlier book, how does it differ from a virtual corporation?
Some of them have actually been around for a long time. A movie production company is in many ways a Protean corporation. It has a core group of people that are there all the time. And then it waxes and wanes according to needs. If they're going out and making a big movie, they might add 200 or 300 people. If they're in a period between films, they may shrink down to a half a dozen. People have the impression that authors control titles of books nowadays, and they really don't. The sales force decides. So when the virtual corporation came out, no one knew what that meant either. But at the time, Bill Davidow and I could force them to stick to it, and then it entered the language. This time around, everybody said, we have no idea what a Protean corporation is. It won't sell. So they said, let's give it a name that essentially means nothing. I mean, The Future Arrived Yesterday could have been a title of a book in 1903. So I insist that at least Protean appear in the subtitle. Right. So that's why it's sort of bizarre that way. I was just over at Cisco. Now here's one of the biggest companies in the entire world. It's a $50 billion company. Cisco is breaking itself up and going after 30 markets simultaneously, using small core teams that will build their marketing and manufacturing and everything else around them based on resources not just at Cisco but everywhere else. That's a traditional company that went virtual 15 years ago and now is becoming very Protean.
Michael, if the Protean Corporation is the ideal business model for the 21st century, then what's your take on how President Obama and his advisors have handled the economy so far?
Well, something about centralization at a time when everything screams for decentralization. I mean, why did we have this electronics revolution and bring infinite access and scope and power to individuals? The whole point of the last 300 years, from the rise of corporations through the Industrial Revolution, through the divisional system of Sloan at GM, through the technology corporation model of Hewlett and Packard, all the way up to the virtual corporation to now, has been moving power down through the corporate pyramid and empowering people out there who actually are facing the problems themselves. We now have 3 billion people in the world, now or very soon to be, within the next 10 years, who will be tethered to this vast informational apparatus to help them with their decision-making. Why would we re-centralize decision-making at that point? It seems to me if you wanted to destroy productivity, that's exactly what you would do. And we're already starting to see the preliminary effects. We have all but killed entrepreneurship in the United States in just the last 4 or 5 years, and it's accelerated in the last 6 months. It started with Sarbanes-Oxley, then it was followed with options expensing. These are all essentially accounting and reward and bureaucratic systems that support large corporations and punish entrepreneurship. And when you consider that entrepreneurs and new companies provide all the new job growth in the United States of America, if you ever wanted to increase unemployment and keep it high permanently, you would kill entrepreneurship in this country.
Do you have any thoughts on how the American business community will look after all the dust settles on the president's spending?
Well, here's the reality, and I blame the Republicans just as much as the Democrats, that over the last 5 years, there's been a systematic attempt to harness in new startup companies and entrepreneurial individuals. If I was a big company, I'd be happy as could be. If I was an entrepreneur, I'd do what entrepreneurs do, which is try to survive and be clever. And what they're doing now is they're devising iPhone apps. They're devising Android phone apps. They're not going to build any great companies, but they're going to make a little money for themselves. There's the model of America in the future. A bunch of big corporations and a bunch of little tiny ones of people trying to get by.
And I've got to ask you, Michael, you wrote a column in October of 2008 that was remarkably harsh on the journalists who fell down on the job during the 2008 presidential election. That column got lots of traffic, both at ABC News and at Pajamas Media. How does that industry proceed in the coming years?
I think traditional media has committed suicide. And this was the first really dangerous suicidal thing they did, and that was they looked around the blogosphere and they looked around at the web and they said, look, this is all subjective writing. This is all opinion pieces. Let's adopt that as if that's what the people want, let's adopt that as our editorial strategy. It's sort of like your 60-year-old uncle who just got divorced that's trying to be hip. And what that does is it takes you away from your core competency. What newspapers had, which was their strength, and this is a lesson to every industry that gets assaulted by a technological revolution. You don't slavishly imitate your threat. You pull back to your core competencies. What newspapers should have done is become more objective and leveraged the skill of news gathering and reporting that they had in all of their talented people in 200 years of American newspaper. I had a great-grandfather who was a newspaper editor in Abilene, Kansas during the cowboy days. He's one of these guys in the movies, you see. He helped start the Oregonian. My grandmother was one of the first women reporters for the LA Times. My 18-year-old son was writing for ABC when he was 15. So, I mean, mine is a newspaper family. What newspapers did instead was they put editorials on the front page. And I remember when that first began at the New York Times, and I was appalled, because they weren't distinguishing between op-ed and reporting. And once you get into that slippery slope, there's no going back. Reporters love that. Reporters love putting their opinion in. The whole point of being an editor was you were supposed to rein those people in and force them to be more balanced and objective. Instead, it was from the top down that they adopted this sloppy strategy towards objectivity. So then they started laying off all the veterans. So you went into a newspaper, into the newsroom, and you began to notice all the gray-haired guys were disappearing. They were taking their golden parachutes. Well, they were also the ones, speaking of Protean Corporations, had the core competency. They were the ones that were the history of journalism. They're the ones that knew how to write a lead. They're the ones that knew how to take bias out of copy. They were gone. Now all of a sudden you have, and this is a classic death spiral of an industry, you get rid of the people who remember the history of the industry, who are the heart of the industry, and you're then replacing with people with no memory. As you begin to spiral downwards, you lose your ability to recruit the best and the brightest. This is what happened at Microsoft after a while. That's why Microsoft has had trouble executing anything, even though it's had good ideas. They don't have the really brilliant guys they used to have. So you start recruiting lesser and lesser talent, because what kid in J school right now wants to go work for a newspaper? So essentially, your intellectual capital starts falling precipitously. And you reach that tipping point where you just can't go back. You can't fix it. And as kind of a last-ditch effort, I really think at this nexus of allowing personal opinions to appear, combined with this desperation, a Hail Mary play to save the industry, newspapers showed incredible bias in the last election towards the party they thought would be most likely to take care of them in their dotage. And I thought the reporting was just horrifying. And that's what I wrote about. And I didn't say, lay off the Republicans. What I said was, go after the Republicans, but go after the Democrats. What I was seeing was, tough, biting reporting going on, going through Sarah Palin's garbage and all that. And I said, okay, fine, if that's the way you want to play. But the rule is, if you're going to go through Sarah Palin's garbage, you have to go through Joe Biden's garbage. If you're going to ask about the background of John McCain, then you got to ask about the background of Barack Obama. And I wasn't seeing that balance. And I think history has shown that, unfortunately, I was prescient. We're only now finding out the real story. And that's to the absolute and eternal shame of newspapers. Frankly, at this point, I wouldn't trust anything I read in a newspaper. I'm a fourth-generation newspaper man. I don't even get a newspaper. They deserve their fate. They brought it on themselves.
We've been talking with Michael Malone, the author of the new book, The Future Arrived Yesterday. And Michael, thanks again for stopping by Silicon Graffiti.
Good to be here at the world headquarters.
Well, from the virtual corporation, or at least the virtual sets that make up the protean business that is Silicon Graffiti, I'm Ed Driscoll.
you.